Greetings. Thanks for coming to my channel, 4D Fitness. I want to give you a little background. I'm a businessman, and these are my degrees. I've got a number of undergraduate degrees. I've also got a graduate degree in business. I'm not a personal trainer, that's my point. But I am an amateur athlete, and I'm very fit at almost the age of 60. I know a lot about getting in shape. I used to have to train and make weight for wrestling, for judo. I was a competitive racquetball player. And during COVID, all of my gyms were shut down. My tennis league stopped happening, and I put on about 25 pounds, and I had to get in shape very, very fast. You can look back on my channel and you can see that in about 60 to 90 days, I went from being exceptionally out of shape to back in pretty good athletic condition again. Now, one of the things I did, I went to the online athletic community when I was getting back in shape, and what I saw is very concerning to me. I see that what seems to masquerade as health and fitness and athleticism, athletic advice, is nothing of that sort. I've been looking into the qualifications of sports scientists and people like that, and the so-called trainers that are online, and what I've found is they seem to not understand that there is a difference between health and fitness and athleticism, okay, which is what I've always been interested in, and what they teach, which is bulking, shredding, getting super lean, getting 6% body fat, developing huge muscles. Now, let me tell you some things, because I've always been in athletics, and you know, when I would be a member of a racquetball club and playing competitive racquetball, which I am a former state champion, we had a bodybuilding section over in another part of the gym, and these bodybuilders occasionally they'd drift over to the side where people actually play sports, and they'd get themselves a racket, and they'd say, hey, play a game? You know, and these people were slow, clumsy, uncoordinated. They had no stamina, okay? They had no athleticism. And as I'm looking closer to what I'm seeing, okay, in the online community, what I'm realizing is, I think in most cases, bodybuilders are people that never were athletes. And when they got to be 16, 17, 18, having not played organized sports, having never developed themselves, not having the heart and the soul of an athlete, they get into the gym and they start pumping iron, and they see their muscles growing, and they start getting interested in their diet, and they see their shredding and their veins popping out, and they believe that they're athletes, but they're not athletes, okay? They're no more athletes than, you know, if you buy some imitation Rolex that looks almost just like a Rolex, but it's not a Rolex, compared to a real Rolex, okay? So the people in the gym that spend all their time in the gym bulking and shredding have no understanding of what it is to be an athlete. So if you will give me the next 11 minutes, I am going to once and for all clearly show you the difference between athleticism, health and fitness, versus this pseudo health and fitness that I'm seeing online, okay? You have all these exercise scientists, these sports and fitness experts, these personal trainers and bodybuilders, weightlifters, powerlifters, and people like that, and they've all got channels. They all think they know everything. They all think that they're qualified to teach the difference. What you're looking at right here is Maria Sakkari, okay? Now, she is a top 10 women's tennis player. You can see she is extremely fit, and you can see this is the type of workout that a top level athlete does, okay, so that she can go out and perform as an athlete. See, there's a purpose to what athletes do. You know, it isn't just about making your biceps bigger and getting your abs more and more shredded so that your veins can show, okay, because, and we all know, if you really look honestly at the long-term effects of just pumping iron, powerlifting, and shredding, you can see that there are no long-term health benefits. These people do not age well. They often die prematurely. You look at Mike Mentzer, who had a heart attack and died at the age of 49. Look at Maria Sakkari. Look at the kind of fitness training that she goes through. We're going to see what she looks like on the tennis court. Now, let me explain a little bit about tennis players, because I am a tennis player. I'm an amateur. You might say I'm just a fairly good, maybe advanced, intermediate tennis player, but I'm almost 60, so I'm not going to be setting any records, okay? But I understand, like, you know, the workouts that we have. I play competitive tennis and USTA tennis, and I probably spend about, when I'm playing, I probably spend about 12 to 14 hours a week on the court, plus some training time in the gym, okay? But the training time in the gym is to help me be a better tennis player, okay? It's not to make my muscles bigger, because if it's all about just bigger muscles, if that's all I'm trying to accomplish, I'm not going to be as good of an athlete. So we're watching Maria. Now let me explain the kind of, you know, endurance that Maria has to have. So besides the fact that she goes through these grueling training processes, okay, in order to make her body athletic, not necessarily just to make her muscles bigger, but because she's a professional athlete and she wants to accomplish things on the court. But think about this, besides the fact that she trains like this, when she goes to a tournament, most tournaments last from Monday morning until Saturday afternoon, and they typically will play a match that runs between 2.5 and 3 hours on Monday. Then they play another one on Wednesday, then they play another one on Friday, then they play a finals on Friday. Now, in between all of those 2.5 to 3 hour matches, they practice every off day. They spend hours at practice. They don't rest in between these days. That's what competitive tennis is like. There's no rest days. But in between the practicing on the tennis court, they still continue to train. Now, all these people in these gyms who are powerlifting are continually talking about recovery time. You know, you've got HIIT, high intensity training, which now is being talked about all the time, which is absolute nonsense. And I will destroy that whole technique, that whole concept pretty soon in some videos. But you know, the reason that all these people in the gym are constantly talking about recovery is because they're not athletic. They don't train their heart and lungs and pulmonary systems. They don't understand what it is to have a 3-hour really intense workout one day and then have to play a competitive professional tennis match for 3 hours on television with millions of people watching the next day. So this is what it really looks like. Look at Maria out there playing tennis. This is what it really looks like when you see an actual athlete. Now, for myself, of course, I'm not a professional, okay, but I've been in sports my whole life from the time I was about 9 years old when I started playing tennis. I played most of the organized sports that were available as a kid: baseball, basketball, football, tennis, bowling, swimming, diving. I played all of those sports recreationally and in organized sports. And then when I got a little older, I got into wrestling and judo and picked up tennis again. I ended up going into racquetball. I've won a lot of racquetball tournaments over the years. And I'm back pretty much to being a tennis player now at the age of 60. But in just a minute, what I want to show you is a guy that goes by Dr. Mike on the internet. And he is I think he's a PhD in exercise physiology, and he teaches at a college. And when I listen to him talk, he seems to believe that he is an expert at fitness, that he is an athlete. And what I want to say is, I make a clear distinction between Dr. Mike and what real athletes do, okay? And I'm going to show you some of the problems with the Dr. Mike type of philosophy and why these bodybuilders so often get sick and die. You know, if you think about Mike Mentzer, the power lifter, the bodybuilder, the Mr. Olympia of 1980. Now here we are with Dr. Mike, and he's showing these great big guys how to lift this heavy weight, and he's demonstrating this curved bar that they're using. Now look at the size of these guys, okay? I'm gonna guess they're 265, maybe 275, and Dr. Mike is showing them the chambered bench. Now look at Dr. Mike, okay? Look at the size of him. what I can tell you from being in athletics all my life is, when I was a member of the racquetball club back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, the guys that looked like this would come up to the courts with a racquetball racket in their hand, and they'd say, "Hey, how about a game?" Now, because I was a player and they looked like Dr. Mike, I knew that they weren't going to be able to give me a game. But because I'm a polite person and don't want to smack anybody down, I'd be like, yeah. And so I would go out on the court and I would try to make it fun for them. But the problem is they were so big and so slow and so clumsy. Oftentimes they would fall down, they would crash into the walls. Then after about 10 minutes, they were breathing and gasping and they couldn't get their breath. And they looked really unwell. And then they'd say, "I've got to quit." And then there were actually times when these great big guys who would attempt to play sports, they would get kind of mad and think that I was trying to beat the heck out of them. But, I couldn't help them to try to find a way to make it somewhat fun for both of us. And what you see here, I want to point out, is as Dr. Mike is showing these guys lifting these weights, one of the emphasis is always on slow, okay? You want to pump that slow. You want to lift that bar very, very slowly. Now, see, this isn't the way you want to train for sports. If you want to be a boxer, a swimmer, a tennis player, a racquetball player, if you want to play squash or baseball or football, you want to train your muscles for reactivity, okay? You want to train your amygdala to actually be the source of your athleticism, where it reacts, and it reacts quickly. When Michael Jordan was playing basketball and he would make some amazing move, where he's in the air, he changes hands, he does a 360, and then he ends up making a hook shot from a position because a defender is in his way, and people would say, "Well, how did you do that?" And he would shrug his shoulders and he would say, "I don't know." He literally didn't know because, see, Michael Jordan was an athlete who had trained his reflexive part of his brain, the amygdala, to perform as an athlete. Now, people like Michael Jordan, Bjorn Borg, John McEnroe don't have this massive bulk that these power lifters do. But what they do have is cardiovascular health, pulmonary health. Okay, and they tend to live longer. I mean, if you look at John McEnroe out there at the age of, I think he's about 67, he's still a pretty good tennis player. You see him playing tennis with people. He's still coaching and teaching, and he's still in very good health. Let's talk about Bjorn Borg for a moment. The men, unlike the women, often they play a 5.5 hour, 5-set, very intense match with millions of people watching on TV. The very next day, they're on the court training and practicing. The next day, they play another 5.5 hour, 5-set match, grueling, okay, highly competitive. When have you ever heard bodybuilders talking about that kind of endurance? And you don't. You hear them continually talking about having to take rest time. That they can't train more than 2 days a week. They can't train a body part more than 2 days a week. This is because they're very, very out of balance. Their muscles are way overdeveloped when it's compared to their pulmonary system and their cardiovascular health. I'll give you another example. I had a friend years ago. I used to have when I was a kid, working in a restaurant, like 18, 19 years old, I had this Mazda RX-7 sports car, and it was a pretty cool little car, okay? And then a friend of mine bought a Triumph TR8. Now, there was a car called a TR7 that was a sporty little car, kind of a British version of the Mazda RX-7, and both of them were pretty quick. The RX-7 and the TR7 were kind of fast, certainly competitive cars in the same class, but Triumph had gotten this idea to have Chevy sell them 305 V8s to put into this Triumph TR8. So my friend bought a TR8, and I mean, this car was really amazing. I mean, just beautiful silver convertible with a black top and a Chevy V8 engine in it. And in a very short amount of time, he tore the transmission out. And the problem was the transmission of that car was designed for a 4-cylinder, 100 horsepower engine. Now, I don't know if the engineers and the executives at Triumph understood the problem that they had having a V8 engine in a car with a transmission that was designed to handle 100 horsepower 4-cylinder. But what happened was my friend took the car in still under warranty. They put a new transmission in, and wouldn't you know it, that transmission fell out again. Okay, now after that, they had to pay for a transmission and they sold the car. Now the reason I gave you that long story is because bodybuilders have a very similar problem to the TR8. Okay, they're overdeveloped. They have their muscles. They think that the goal is to continue to add muscle on top of muscle on top of muscle without training their heart, their lungs, their pulmonary system, their cardiovascular system, their reflexes, their speed, and all these other things. And that's why their life expectancy is so much lower than legitimate athletes.